Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler. I follow what goes on in the world, and I'm hoping I can talk to some people who also are looking about what's going on in the world and are upset to see uh, what people are having the greatest impact on how the nation is, how the global system is. Uh, we've got Donald Trump and Elon Musk here in the United States. We got Putin in Russia. And between those things, um, and we got Netanyahu and his gang in Israel. Um, Between those things, and I'm not saying Israel didn't have a right to strike back, but their decisions were so pathological, in my opinion, even in terms of Israeli. But anyway, that's. Uh, I believe that there was a whole lot better path forward after October 7th than the one that Israel took. And you look at the character of the people involved, but particularly here in the United States, Donald Trump, who is, I think, the most blatantly, fundamentally flawed in every moral respect human being I've ever seen. And in some of my books, I've studied some human monsters before. He is quite extraordinary. And Elon Musk, I don't feel like I understand Elon Musk as well. Uh, I've heard Gavin Newsom say he's changed, and all the people who knew him in California. So anyway, I don't know. This guy is weird, as far as I can tell, and he's coming from a very ugly place. That much I know, but just what's going on with him, I don't know. But Trump has been well studied, and this is a very profoundly broken person. And what an impact he's had on the world. I mean, this is a different country right now than it was before he ascended to the power that he's wielded. In the first term, he damaged a great deal of our political culture, and now he's just going all out to tear it to shreds. So, why are we in a situation here where world is getting impacted by someone who's so terrible. And Putin, if we'd had somebody of a decent Russian character, like a Gorbachev, if and instead of a human monster like Vladimir Putin, who kills his opponents and who launched a war of genocide in some respects, and encouraged apparently the commission of war crimes against innocent people. These are human monsters. So why is the world so badly organized so that somehow, even though these people are unusually ugly, they get a huge say in what kind of world we're going to live in? It's not the Europe that people spent generations trying to build a peaceful, cooperative, economically integrated area. No, this is a country, this is a continent that's sent back into the ages of barbarism that gave us two world wars that were nightmares. Putin could do all that just by making his decision. Why is it that we've got human monsters having such big impacts? Well, let me. There are two levels to the answer that I think of. One is I've observed the American scene, um, uh, just sort of as a political analyst, and I've seen how it is that there's a power on the right um, that has been extraordinarily successful in becoming powerful in this United States, that over the course of the last 50 years or 30 years or something like that, this really destructive thing has been, I've observed that, and I've observed how it didn't take a whole lot to get a whole lot of power. I observed, for example, the Koch brothers, and all the things that they organized. I mean, I hope that the historians will recognize that they accomplished something really extraordinary. I don't think any private individuals in the history of the nation up until that point had been able to have such a profound impact on the political culture and the balance of power. For example, on climate change, but a whole lot more than that, like ALEC and stuff like that. Greedy people, pathologically greedy people, and they had a huge impact. I found myself writing about the problems of this rising force and the failure of the rest of the country to mobilize against it. And I saw that the line from Yeats illuminated the situation. The good lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. And it's that passionate intensity that makes them prevail. The people who prevail are the people who have the most drive to get power and often wealth. Alan Watts has a line that you can't get enough of what you don't really need. So the Koch brothers, with billions of dollars, utilize all their power and have a genius organizational ability to wield the power. Though they have billions of dollars, they do everything they can to prevent this country from confronting an utterly serious crisis that we are entering into already, and that threatens essentially the viability of this planet for our children and our grandchildren and so on. The greatest crisis. And these people, in order to protect their own short-term profits, are willing to exercise their genius to paralyze the country from dealing with what it seriously needed to deal with, to get more money. Already they have billions. Now, over the years, when I've thought about greed, I've often thought in terms of, just how crazy it is for people who are super, super rich, or even fairly rich, to put getting money ahead of so many other values. I mean, like Donald Trump, and it wasn't enough to be president. I mean, his greed was such that he had to continue his lifelong habit of seeing how he can make money off of people. So there is that pathology. There is an irrational element, something broken, that even when the person has more than they could spend in a lifetime, and maybe even more than their children and grandchildren that he disperses monies to could spend in a lifetime, that nonetheless a big priority is spent on getting more. And Alan Watts, there is something really sick and broken about that. And the people who have an insatiable hunger that is broken out of any kind of a moral order, a proper set of values to weigh one's own enrichment against the health of the world, for example. The people who never can get enough are continually striving to get more. And that means that broken people will be the ones that have the passionate intensity to grab as much as they can of power and wealth. And as for that wealth thing, the greed thing, there is the greed which makes it kind of material, in which case the best social science I know on the question says that after a certain point, which isn't all that rich, I don't know, $70,000, something or other, above, more than that, doesn't have a whole lot to do with a person's fulfillment, happiness, well-being, however you want to put it. There may be ambiguities about that, but I think that the basic truth is that wealth has seriously diminishing marginal utility, as the economists would put it. It's good to get enough, but then once, enough is as good as a feast applies a lot to money when it comes to the real good. But then the people who can't get enough are driven always to get more, which means that money rules and greed rules. And part of the picture there also is that while wealth in terms of human fulfillment isn't a zero-sum game, my getting more fulfillment doesn't mean anybody else getting less fulfillment. The struggle for power is of that nature. Anybody's gain has got to be somebody else's loss. It's like sitting at the poker table. It all adds up to zero. And therefore, we get ourselves into a situation where the more money can buy power, the more it makes sense for people to want more and more money. And you get things like Citizens United decision from the plutocracy's minions on the Supreme Court saying, let's let money buy elections more and more and more. And now we got Elon Musk buying a president. It's practically, it seems, or a big chunk of a president with his $250 million that he basically gave to Trump's campaign, if I understand correctly. Elon Musk, I think, really is just about power. I don't know that for sure, but my feeling is, watching him, is that the money isn't something that he thinks of as making him rich. The money allows him to do things to make himself more powerful. So I think he's one of the people who's figured out how important money is for power in America, and it has become more important during the course of my lifetime because of things like Citizens United and buying the Supreme Court. The people with a lot of greed are exercising a whole lot of power over the United States, and always have, say, since the Civil War. I mean, it's a big part of our history anyway. But there's something particularly ugly about the means that it's happening in our times. We've got not the sort of corporate corrupting force of the late 19th century that was had still some regard for the American Republic that got founded. Now we've got people like Elon Musk who walk in there and quite willingly take on the job of destroying the federal government that has taken all this time to develop. That's a decent job of creating the governmental structure a society like ours needs to function well. And the extent to which it hasn't functioned well is remarkably easy to demonstrate that it's all got to do with that same political force, that the force that took over the Republican Party ceased at a certain point to even be interested in cooperating to see what could get done. That it was all going to be a struggle for power, and they were going to try to destroy Clinton's presidency, and they were going to try to destroy Obama's presidency, and they tried to delegitimize and destroy Biden's presidency. These are people who, an amalgam of the ones that directly wield the power and the ones that buy the ones that wield the power. Insatiable appetites of very broken people who get a disproportionate say in American politics and have taken over the Republican Party, bringing together a particularly ugly set of American forms of brokenness. Not just the corporate greed of people who would sacrifice future generations to protect their own short-term profits, even when they're billionaires, and who can never get enough power. I mean, like, if you're the most powerful man in the world, as they always say about the American president, imagine the insatiability of the desire for power to be the most powerful person in the world, certainly in the United States, president of the United States, and it not being enough. How broken is that? That Donald Trump starts usurping other whatever powers he can usurp. He won't spend the money on Ukraine that he was back with that first impeachment. He wasn't supposed to be using that money. He was required to give to Ukraine as a means of extorting something for his own political purposes. What a terrible human being. And it's all right out there. It was supposed to be a check on this tendency that the people who are insatiable in their desire for wealth and the people who are insatiable in their desire for power and also people who are morally deficient in some way in their preparedness to sacrifice other people to maximize their own power and wealth. And that's the kind of people who, by the way, emerge with civilization, because this is the problem of power and social evolution. That when you've got a war of all against all, which inevitably arose with civilizing societies outside of any order, that's a whole another thing. But if you're going to get a certain kind of as there's a sort of elimination tournament in that war of all against all, and certain cultural options and certain ways for people to be and to run things, you end up with tyrants. You end up with gangsters gradually ascending over the course of some millennia until the first empires arise. So the same thing that gives us Putin and Netanyahu and Trump and Musk. Also, if you look at the history, the rise of civilization, in the 6 places where it arose on its own, not transplanted, you see the same pattern. that the worst are given a disproportionate say. That as the war of all against all leads to the elimination of the losers and the spread of the ways of the winners, you end up at the this pinnacle. It takes about 5,000 years to get from the very beginnings of civilizing up to the emergence of the first empires in the Nile Valley, the Tigris, Euphrates, and the other four places. It's about 5,000 years, and it's tends to be a gradual process, and it leads to ultimately a winner in the cumulative effects where the things are being decided, which ones get into the future and which don't. Those that can prevail in a war of all against all. Anarchy produces the rise of the gangster power. And that's what we got right now in the United States. And that's what we've always had as a problem in the development of civilization. Because if there's nothing to prevent it, it will be the most motivated and capable few who rise to be the top gangster in a war of all against all. Which is why democracy has been such an important project for civilization. The tendency, in the absence of setting up an order that controls power, the tendency is for power to go to the gangsters. And democracy was invented over a course of time as a way of countering the natural tendency of an anarchic system to control what the competition for power will be and to diffuse the power into the people so that something like the will of the people gets expressed rather than the natural tendency that we see in the ancient world where you got a tyrant or a tyrannical oligarchy or something like that. And the mass of people are living lives that are in one way or another more or less in matters of slavery and oppression. I'm pretty sure that the life of the average human being in the first civilizations and the life of the average human being in the hunting-gathering societies that preceded all that, that you would much rather be a member of one of those hunting-gathering societies than, draw your lot out of the barrel or something like that, and the chances that you're going to be one of the people who's exploiting the other people are not real great. 90-some% of the people are the ones that draw. You're going to be oppressed, and so that's what we have right now in America is a force of tyranny, fighting. To regain power it had lost in the United States when a constitution substituted, imperfectly, but in a meaningful sense, the will of the people for the selection of some of the worst people to get a disproportionate say in how the human world is going to be. Right now in the United States, all these federal workers and all that are being put through all this traumatic stuff that they said they wanted to inflict trauma on federal workers. What kind of people would want to do that? What kind of sick view is it to think that these middle-class Americans who go to their jobs every day and overwhelmingly do work in good faith to serve the American people, and then to come into office and want to punish them? We shouldn't lose sight of how much craziness there is that goes with all this. In a sense, we're dealing with the battle between good and evil. And a big part of how evil works is it does really well when people get kind of crazy. It's helpful for the force of brokenness, which could be another name for evil. It's a coherent force. You can see it working. It's a force of selection to begin with. And then the repercussions of that. Once you get that selection going, you end up with a lot of brokenness getting transmitted through the society. And so you get not only people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk playing the wrecking ball role that they're playing right now, a force of destruction. Yeah. How could you not recognize that this is being done destructively? Whatever might be the useful thing to do with the federal workforce, for example, this is certainly not it. This is not how you get from here to any better there. There's a lot of craziness going on now, and craziness is one form of brokenness. How else do you get so many people to mistake the evil for the good? A lot of people believe that this guy is about the business of making America great again. What but a crazy frame of mind does it take to just watch a little bit and see how little that is? How much do you have to understand to recognize that if we've come out for Putin, if the leader of the free world is now supporting the dictator and saying manifestly false stuff like Zelensky's a dictator and the Ukrainians started the war, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it is crazy. It isn't just a difference of opinion. I mean, the whole world is seeing what's happened. So all of this could only happen if there was a lot of brokenness in millions of Americans, that all that could have been displayed. So it's not just the worst people, it's also exploiting the worst in people, breaking them in some respect. So that, for example, one of the things I see in terms of getting the worst out of a big part of America is that there was a process by which the Republican electorate of Ronald Reagan, which I know something about, and which was a mostly benign political culture, mixtures of things in it, not all of it benign by any means, but there were in the people of Ronald Reagan's America and in the Republican world of Dwight Eisenhower when I was a boy, there was a basic, I would say, predominant goodness in that party. And the people would never, I don't believe, at the time of Ronald Reagan, those people looking at Donald Trump would have rejected him reflexively. Between the time of Reagan and Trump's nomination and election in 2016 and onward till now, some major transformations were made to make a lot of Americans, in some respects, kind of crazy. And the essence of their error was mistaking the evil for the good. So that while the worst people get a disproportionate say, in the process of destroying American democracy, this force was able to take a lot of the, to take conservative America, let's put it that way, which had a good mixture of a predominant element of virtue in it, along with its defects, and turn it into the Republican Party that it has become. One that was able to nominate and then stay behind a guy like Donald Trump, who differs from Ronald Reagan in such fundamental ways of the spirit in the dimension of good and evil, that to be able to go from the one to the other implies having crossed a line in which one mistook the evil for the good. So it is the means by which the worst people can gain power in a democracy, particularly in a democracy, that you could get 50% of the American people, 49.9 or whatever it was, in 2024 to vote for one of the worst human beings one could ever find. It would be hard to design someone more destructive and dangerous for the health of a country. His particular set of defects in the realm of character and morality and motivation, however you want to put it, those defects combined with some kind of gifts that he's got, that he's been able to gain as much power as he has, accomplishing a lot of really exceptional things. Like we've never seen any political leader dominate a whole major political party through intimidation the way Donald Trump does. This guy has the gift of a gangster. He's got some judgment about how to to exploit the brokenness in people and to make them crazy for his own purposes. The worst people, and in a democracy that requires making people crazy, because it's only crazy people who would give power to something that would be so damaging to their world. I guess this is the human tragedy of when you get a dynamic that gives a disproportionate say to the spirit of the gangster. You're going to have a lot of brokenness in people. People are going to get ground up in a world in which there's a war of all against all, for starters. And then in which the people who get a disproportionate say are people that are very broken around issues of greed and the lust for power, insatiable, so that all other values get squeezed out of their worldview. And for them to get to say what way we're going to go as a society, what a tragedy. And in that book back there, The Parable of Tribes, that's my main idea actually in the world, that when our civilization, our species, extricated itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, which is 10,000, 12,000 years ago, an unprecedented step in the history of life, that had some inevitable consequences. It was a brand new situation. It had its own dynamic, and it meant, if you take a few steps, it meant inevitably the spirit of the gangster would have a disproportionate say in how the human world would be shaped. And just like the Constitution is a way within a nation it's intended to eliminate the selection for the ways of the gangster and to distribute into the human pool. And so we get not the worst people, but at least as good as we are. So also at the level of humankind in general, there is a need to create an order in which the worst of our potentialities are brought under control. And the worst of our potentialities include things like a nuclear holocaust. So you have to create an order that encompasses the whole system of civilization in order to pretty well guarantee that the human civilization will continue on this planet beyond a couple centuries. Because we are in serious danger of destroying ourselves, either ecologically or through a nuclear holocaust. So the processes that lead to the worst people getting a disproportionate say, they're one way into looking at the whole project we have to get our whole civilization in order well enough and soon enough that we can avoid destroying ourselves. I think it's really a toss-up. So looking at why is it that we've got a world right now where if you ask who are the people who've done the most to have an impact on the world, and right now I think the major candidates are all sociopaths and gangsters, and I think they all have had all those who have had the most impact on the world right now. Well, at least at near the top of the standings, probably at the top, are people who have had a very destructive impact. So we obviously haven't brought this force under control. And by the way, if you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, I knit all these different levels together. There is a way in which one can see what we're up against here in the United States, for example, as a recognizable event that sometimes befalls the world and has to do with the workings of a force of brokenness that sometimes is able to take over a particular actor in the system. It's not spread evenly through the whole system. And sometimes the world has to cope with something that is the focus of a coherent force, that pretty much everything it says and does makes the world worse, makes the human world more broken. I've studied several of these. The slave power was of that nature back in the 1850s and into the Civil War. The Nazi regime, the rising out of the Weimar Republic in the 20s and into the early 30s. That was another pure case of this being a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse, which is my definition of evil. And I hope that you would acknowledge that if such a force could be shown, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse or more broken, that if it could be shown, that would be reasonable to call evil. But you don't like the name, but still, it really does act like evil. I think that if you try to understand it with some other name, you might miss the depth of the thing. And the Republican Party is the third case. They are being led by one of the worst people who has transformed them into essentially intimidated people who have sold their soul. I mean, how are we to understand the soul of the Republicans that have confirmed these nominees? I have an earlier video from a week and a half ago called "A Soul of a Great Nation," and talk about what does it mean what does the word soul mean? Is there such a thing as a soul of a nation? How does that relate to, is there something in us that's worth calling a soul? Anyway, that's a lot of that's discussed. And one of the things I said there was that, to me, the idea of a person selling their soul, I like that way of describing it. I mean, any other way I have of articulating that lacks some spiritual meaningfulness. I do think that what we've seen in the Republican Party ever since Donald Trump managed to subordinate them to an unprecedented degree, which is I see it as having happened at the very end of 2017. It surprised me a lot. I thought the Republicans were in a position where they could protect themselves but it's apparently already Trump had them under his thumb, and they rallied to defend him in his indefensibilities, even while they privately spoke to their colleagues like they understood full well what a dangerous thing Trump was. But they were willing to sell their souls even then to support a guy that they knew was a danger to the country. Now, that sort of articulates the selling of your soul. You're selling out your nation, too. Why would you lend your support to somebody that could damage your country? A threat to as it became ever more clear, a threat to the constitutional order. He seemed so obviously unconstrained by the norms, laws. He was willing to do everything he could to exercise power until somebody would stop him. And he had some means of getting the Republicans to go back him rather than leave him out there to cope with his problems on his own. I don't know what he had done to intimidate them, but the evidence is there. And they sure were intimidated by the time we get to the first impeachment, this was just one of the many charges that could have been brought against him in an impeachment. It was serious, and it was completely proven. And of course, the Republicans had sold their souls. So it's not just the worst people. It's the brokenness within the rest of the system that enables this thing to win. And on the liberal side, or the pro-democracy side, there has also been a kind of brokenness that's gotten in the way of the good guys successfully contending against and defeating and driving into oblivion this evil force that was rising on the right. Not the Ronald Reagan Republican Party with its virtues and its faults, both meaningful. No, it had become a party in which people were continually having to choose between supporting what they knew was right and doing what they were willing to sell their souls to get. So Trump doesn't get convicted for either of his impeachments, even though by the time of the second impeachment, the guy had shown himself to be an insurrectionist, the first loser of a presidential election to refuse to concede defeat, even though it was obviously a legitimate election. And even though it was obvious that Trump was just selling a lie, exploiting again some kind of craziness out there. So the levels of brokenness are very intertwined. And brokenness begets brokenness. And on my website, betterhumanstory.org, if you're interested in seeing that there actually is a discernible force in the world, a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken, go on to betterhumanstory.org and take a look at, search for the word discernible or the word evil. Because there is such a force at work in our world. And when we are dealing with the rise of a Trump-Musk fascistic force that's taking a wrecking ball to our country, it is illuminated in the perspective of seeing all these forms of brokenness that are working together, and brokenness begetting brokenness, and the need for the side of wholeness, the side that wants the will of the people and not the tyrant, for example, to have the say, that they recognize what they're up against and they fight it for what it is. The American people have an ingrained capacity to recognize in their hearts and guts the phenomenon of evil. All those World War II movies with the Nazis conjure it up. Not all of them, not The Longest Day. Oh, I forgot where I was going. And I wish somebody was out there to remind me. We are in a moment where we're dealing with a degree of craziness. If we had seen more fully the evil that was rising, we would have recognized that more adequately that there was a problem, that people were following that force. I tried in the early 90s to interest liberal gatekeepers in the radio business, that we needed to counter what Rush Limbaugh is doing to the minds of the conservatives of America. And they said, Limbaugh's audience is not our concern. That is the epitome of what's been wrong among the good guys, the guys who are not in favor of moving in the direction of fascism, that are more interested in the truth and not willing to continually peddle in lies. But in the case of America, since say the early 90s, at least that's when I started to see it, and then even more fully in 2004, not recognizing that something profound was changing on the other side of the American political divide, that it was that the battle had moved from conservative versus liberal on issues of policy. It had moved to a deeper spiritual level altogether. And that is the spiritual level of good versus evil. And because the Republican Party had become one of those pure cases that were in themselves a coherent force that consistently played a destructive role. And from the consistency of that, one can infer the existence of a coherent force that's running that party. And it leads by 2015 to a base that's so broken that it'll look at a Donald Trump that the Republicans of Reagan or Eisenhower's age would have said, let's get this guy off the stage. I wouldn't even allow him in the house with my daughters. Isn't that what a Republican would have said back then? But no, they want to give this guy the powers of the presidency. And by 2015, there's something broken and crazy in the state of consciousness of conservative America about some range of things sufficient so that when they look at Donald Trump, They don't respond the way the Republicans of Reagan's era would have. We've got a lot of brokenness in our world. And part of the brokenness on the liberal side has been the failure to see that coherent force and fight it for what it is, which is essentially a force of evil. We Americans, I was saying, have been entrained to respond to evil. World War II movies about Nazis, and then the big blockbusters, Star Wars, the first three. It's about good and evil. And we get our passions behind Luke Skywalker and his gang. We get spiritually connected with their goodness and their National Geographic relationship with the Ewoks and how organic that is versus the machines, these guys walking around in those white suits. It's all, it's a Vietnam era repudiation of the evil empire. And we Americans get trained in that. And there comes the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Good versus evil, and people are passionate about it. These Americans know how to experience the battle between good and evil and have a passionate intensity that Frodo getting those rings melted down again, saving the world from, what's his name, Sauron or whatever it is. That matters greatly. And then there's Avatar. Americans who are into good versus evil have made that, I think, the all-time highest grossing movie there is. I think nationally, I think globally, but I'm not positive about all that. But it's a really, really, really big deal. And the military-industrial complex that we identify with in the battle that culminates the thing. I don't mean we identify with the natural, beautiful, life-oriented world of our hero and those people and that tree against this deadly thing. Good versus evil is life versus death, ultimately. The Death Star in Star Wars. The destruction of the planet in search of unobtainium in Avatar. Unobtainium capturing that spiritual brokenness of people who will never be able to get enough of what they're striving always to get, because the problem is the brokenness inside the middle of them. Their soul? I don't know. Going back to soul. What does happen to the Republicans who sold their soul? I mean, we in the Western world have a whole literature about people selling their soul. Faust is the main example. And the idea of people selling their soul is a spiritually very meaningful thing for whatever reasons. I think that means that people understand that there are temptations in this world. And these temptations have to do with good versus evil. And selling your soul for the devil means that you will aid evil to get something for yourself, which is the fundamental nature of what's wrong conduct. Never can get enough of what you don't really need. So there's a kind of craziness in the Koch brothers, finding it really important to enrich themselves further, important enough to sacrifice our children and grandchildren. Human brokenness is a function of the inevitable systemic brokenness where power has not been controlled. It is inevitable that when we began inventing our own way of life, we would be in a situation in which there wouldn't be a pre-existing order to govern how things would happen, like there is in the natural order that evolves biologically, which I capture with the line. The lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. That's what naturally evolves biologically. But the unprecedented step onto the path of civilization, which is a new form of life that's not been crafted by that biological evolutionary process, but that's being invented by the creature. And suddenly there is in this system these new kinds of things that are going to have to interact with each other. And unlike the lion and the sheep and the grass, or the wolf and the lamb, there's no established balance about what's viable to get into the future. There is no order of a natural sort, and there's no order imposed from on the whole, because there's been no time for the creature that's invented this unprecedented situation, that's invented a new kind of life, that's invented and not selected biologically. That creature, it finds itself in a new situation where there are going to inevitably be interactions, and there's going to be nothing to govern how those interactions are going to go. So it's anarchic. That produces a selection for the ways of power. That makes for broken people, because how it gets selected for is a war of all against all. It traumatizes people. Of course, look at the Bible. Look at the terrible things always going on. And then the societies that emerge, these tyrannies, are societies that will impose on people requirements having to do with the kinds of societies that were able to prevail in a war of all against all. And therefore are not sufficiently shaped for what best meets human needs. And so people are having to internalize the demands of societies that have been shaped by the requirements of survival in an anarchic system where the gangster gets a disproportionate say. And the people who are forced to live in these societies are internalizing those demands. This is what I got to do, says society. And you got to be this way to maximize power, says the anarchic system that inevitably emerged. So I say that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, and I imagine that there are a lot of them, and that's another topic, but that steps onto the path of civilization will inevitably, regardless of its own inherent nature, inevitably launch itself on a process of social evolution in which a force of brokenness is playing a very destructive role. That there will be a selection for cultural options that are not optimal in terms of the good, but have what it takes to prevail in a war of all against all. And we look at Lebanon back in the 70s, or Somalia back in the 90s, and we can see what rises in an anarchic situation. It's the warlords, they're gangsters. That's why the worst people get a disproportionate say. And the challenge is to control power. And that is essentially the task that we have right now as we're battling against fascism in America. To maintain American democracy and the rule of law is the battle over whether we're going to have an order that controls power, or whether uncontrolled power, wielded by the worst people, will dictate what our future will be. I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm the author of The Parable of the Tribes, about what inevitably happens with the breakthrough of civilization, which it's very interesting that people have not looked at how profound a step it was to take to extricate ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically. It's a real failure to extend the evolutionary perspective. And I'm the author of that book back there, What We're Up Against, which was written just before Donald Trump entered onto the political stage. And it was about this rising force of brokenness that liberal America and America in general needed to see and to fight for what it was. We know how to do that. We do it identifying with our heroes in those movies. And we can be led to do that without necessarily using the word evil. I'm not sure that Avatar ever uses the word evil, but you can see the evil and you get the guts when you see what Trump is doing, what the plutocracy are doing, what the Supreme Court's been doing, all these things are just, they are so ugly. And people can be led to see them as manifestations of this evil thing that's threatening America right now, that's taken over and is seeing how far it can get away with it. And I say, yeah, people will be moved and things don't go well, like the price of eggs or whatever like that. But another component should be to tap into those passions that the Star Wars and Avatar and the Lord of the Rings tap into. Because what we are up against is an extraordinary thing, quite unprecedented in American history. Maybe the slave power had a lot in common, but not like this. There were still gentlemen who hadn't sold their souls in the same way. They thought they were men of honor. There is no honor in the Republican Party. They're led by a liar, and they're who's held in power by fear and from the support of people who sell their souls. And I do wonder, does that change them? Is a Republican who has sold their soul in such a blatant and obvious and destructive way, are they in some important way different from if they had taken a stand? Well, my guess is that they are. And here's how I envision it. Liz Cheney, I think, has a feeling about herself in the world which fills her heart and soul. I think she knows that she played the role of a hero, a patriot. And I bet she feels a whole lot better than any of these Republicans and senators who voted to confirm Tulsi Gabbard, Director of Central Intelligence, Kash Patel, Director of the FBI, etc. They long since sold their souls. They went full on to support the big lie when Trump was after Trump's attempted insurrection. Why wouldn't they sell their souls now? They already gave up on the idea that they were on the side of what's right and true and good. I think there is a part of the soul that's lost when you know that when you're in that posture. I would rather be Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or the people who run Bulwark than to be any of these Republicans who know better but are willing to do the bidding of the worst human being I've ever seen, so up close and personal. Thanks. Bye-bye. Andy Schmuckler, website A Better Human.